looked like James Harden and the Houston Rockets were going to do great things together. Harden has some MVP quality seasons with the team, and the Rockets became the team that he could lead on his own after his exit from Oklahoma City over chemistry problems with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. However, the relationships between Harden and Rockets would end in divorce, with Harden leaving in a big trade for the Brooklyn Nets. Why did it have to happen? In this video, we'll look at the reasons why Harden wanted out of Houston. But first, a simple reminder on how to enter our brand new giveaway. We are giving away either an iPhone X Max, the new iPad mini, or a MacBook Pro. It's all your choice. So be sure to leave a like, comment the keyword, subscribe, and turn on notifications to enter the giveaway. It's really that simple. Looking back, the problems between James Harden and the Rockets didn't just start this season, but you could be forgiven if you thought they did. After all, this season is when those problems peaked and when we saw an actual trade happen. The narrative about Harden wanting to leave the Rockets became one of the biggest stories of the offseason when it comes to superstar players around the league. It's hard to acquire a franchise player in the NBA. Teams generally hold on to them. So when Harden was on the trading block for Houston, it was news around the league. We've all probably heard the rumors about what various teams were willing to offer, even what they weren't willing to offer, to acquire James Harden. However, the problem runs deeper than some disagreements this season resulting in a trade. You want to see where things really started, you have to look back. Specifically, you have to look back to at least the last season when the Houston Rockets were in the playoff. The Rockets haven't been the most successful playoff team during the Harden era. At least they haven't been a team that's been able to get through. Sure, there are a lot of bad teams right now that would take the kind of results the Rockets were getting over their current situation, but as far as title contenders go, the Rockets in the playoffs have been marked by underperformance. They just weren't able to break through with better opposition, like Golden State holding them back. Even when James Harden was an MVP player and contributed ridiculous numbers on offense. The Rockets have lost in the conference finals in 3 out of the past 4 seasons. In the one season where they didn't lose in the semis, they lost in the conference finals against none other than the Warriors. We might be talking about a completely different story right now if Stephen Curry and the Warriors disappeared and were absent from the playoffs. After all, the Warriors eliminated the Rockets in 2 of the past years. In the 2018 playoffs, where James Harden was coming off an MVP performance in the regular season, and Daryl Morey was the executive of the year, the Warriors beat the Rockets in the conference finals after Houston came the closest they had to reaching the finals with Harden. That might have been the breaking point for Harden. And after the Rockets failed to get that far again the following seasons, the clock was ticking before Harden would eventually leave Houston for another team. The NBA is a player-centric league. If a player like Harden really wants to get out of their team, it's rare that the organization will be able to stop it. And this reason about the Rockets not being good enough? It doesn't take much speculation to tell that was a major factor on the list of causes. You can look at Harden's statements to prove it, because Harden himself practically came out and said as much. After the bubble, after that loss, I wanted to reevaluate my career, the team, where the organization was going, Harden said to the media when he was being introduced with the Brooklyn Nets. You look from the top to bottom, the general manager leaving, Mike D'Antoni leaving, to reevaluating our personnel and seeing if we had enough to compete with the best teams in the league. As time went on, as free agency and things like that started to go on, I feel like we didn't have a chance. The writing was on the wall for the Rockets for a while now, as they failed to find playoff success and began reshaping their front office and coaching staff, something that unsettled Harden. Of course, some would say that things aren't that simple, especially people who would side with the Rockets organization over their temperamental superstar, who eventually made the move even after getting the Rockets to make other changes to accommodate it. One example of this is the way that James Harden and Russell Westbrook era turned out. Westbrook and Harden had, of course, played together in Oklahoma City, but that was before Harden had his own team. Things were different when Westbrook was dealt to the Rockets, and if there was any time for the Rockets to win a title, it would have been that time. The Rockets had given up all-star Chris Paul to get him, and based on his play in Phoenix, it looks like Paul definitely still has some value as a key piece and hasn't fallen off yet because of his age. The move gave the Rockets another superstar caliber player and should have let them compete with teams like the Warriors and the Lakers when it comes to the playoffs. However, things obviously didn't go like that in reality. Even if the team was projected to be good on paper, Westbrook ended up having the worst playoff average of his career, and he would be dealt to the Washington Wizards only a season after joining the Rockets. Rockets. The experiment had failed. With Houston moving no closer to a title than they had been before making the trade, the Rockets moved on from one of the best statistical players in the league. While they did get a big haul in return that included John Wall, losing Westbrook instead of getting the chance to fully utilize his potential alongside Harden is still a sign that things went seriously wrong for Houston. It's been reported that Westbrook and Harden clashed over the team culture. In other words, they didn't get along, and Harden is regarded by some as having run the team's other star out of town. Westbrook didn't tolerate tardiness. With the Rockets, scheduled departure times were treated as mere suggestions by Harden and others. The report from ESPN said about the situation between the two players. A former Rockets staffer said in the report that nothing ever started on time in Houston thanks to Harden. The players even clashed when it came to things like film. When Harden wasn't on time on one occasion, Westbrook demanded that the film session start right away without him. Head coach Mike D'Antoni said that the session would just have to wait until Harden showed up, which only furthered the rift between the two stars. The report does say that it isn't clear which player wanted out, but it looks like the Houston organization favored Harden. They dealt Westbrook first after all, sending him to the Wizards in exchange for John Hall and a 2023 first-round pick. More reports after the fact did come out saying that Harden preferred to play with Wall, which gives some idea of how the trade might have come to happen. According to CBS Sports, though, the trade didn't do as much to solve the problems in Houston as some might have thought it would. It probably didn't have the same outcome that Harden himself was hoping for. How could things have ended up like this after Harden got what he wanted, you ask? It takes some more looking back to the days before the Westbrook trade to figure that out. During the time when both players were on the Rockets, Westbrook was the one keeping Harden accountable. He was reported as wanting several big changes within the Rockets organization to help turn Houston around into becoming a winning team. That included more accountability for Harden, whose perceived selfishness on the court and his lateness in other activities rubbed some teammates the wrong way. As a player who had been alongside Harden for a number of years, and one that had a friendly relationship with him, it was Westbrook that called things out more than others. Harden might have expected things to change when Westbrook was exchanged for Wall, but unfortunately for him, he would be wrong. It was also reported that Wall and DeMarcus Cousins also had a tense team meeting with Harden following Wall's arrival in Houston, trying to get some kind of change. Just changing star teammates didn't work in Harden's case, because his pattern of behavior was managing to annoy multiple players at this point, and even Wall. Someone coming in from out of town who has never played alongside Harden before was able to pick up on what the issue was after not even being on the roster for very long. The group was fed up with his antics, tired of the headlines and the constant questions about Harden's state of mind and where this was all going, CBS Sports said. And with every day that Harden remained in Houston, his presence became increasingly burdensome for a team that just wanted a sense of clarity and understanding. It's not the first time that Harden has been accused of not taking the game as seriously as he should, because Harden isn't the same kind of player as someone like LeBron or Kobe Bryant, or some of the other hyper-competitive names throughout NBA history. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Harden is still an iconic player, immediately recognizable to any fan that turns on the TV and spots him and his iconic beard. But he's known for the other things, like his personal branding and formerly his relationship with a Kardashian, just as much as he's known for basketball. While Harden committed himself to the game enough to make it at the highest level, there have been questions raised about whether or not that commitment is strong enough to be the main player in a championship team. With other players at that level like LeBron and Steph Curry, you don't see these kinds of headlines about locker room clashes because of laziness or about off-the-court distractions taking precedent over being the best player they can be. Whether or not all this is the fault of Harden depends on how you want to look at it. James Harden will pretty much just be himself for better or worse, and that is an exciting player on the court who will dazzle fans with his scoring ability and can put up the team on his back when he's at his best. But him being himself also carries some problems. And while plenty of teams would love to have a player of Harden's caliber, for Houston, it might have mainly held them back, and in the end resulted in him making an early exit from the Rockets without the franchise ever breaking through and winning a ring. The Rockets had James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and should have been able to challenge the best teams and do great things. In the end, they kept neither player and now have John Wall and an uncertain future. Sometimes the combination of a star player and a talented team just isn't going to work out. This was almost definitely one of those times.